Anxiety is something that is part of the human experience, and we all have it at different levels and are triggered by different things that create that for us. Certainly, COVID times enhanced some of that as we were having to shelter and isolate and then reintegrate back into the world. So I think it's a common thing that it's important to talk about so that people feel like their experience is normal too. Welcome to the Train Your Brain podcast. I'm Natasha Stebbins.
And I'm Nolan Ross.
And we're here today to talk a little bit more about anxiety and how it affects us.
I think you brought up a really great point in the intro. COVID really boosted, I think, a lot of people's anxiety. I know it did for me. My quick story, back in December of 2020, when we thought things were getting back to normal.
Yeah.
They weren't really, but we thought. We thought. I feel that when my mom started going back to work with safety and a mask and everything, but she would go to work and I would still be at home, and for some reason, I just started getting such heavy anxiety about her leaving, and throughout the months, it got so bad that I just broke down if she even went downstairs to get the mail. I would be having panic attacks, crying, almost every day, with her leaving for 5 minutes at most. And I had to go with her everywhere, which that was tiring because I had to focus on my own stuff, but I also felt like I had to go with her everywhere. And especially when we got back to going to IRL school in 2021, I was really nervous too, because I was like, I'm still dealing with this. It's July. It's been 6 or 7 months, and I'm still dealing with this, and I'm going back to school in a month. And that caused me also a lot of anxiety.
Sure.
I have luckily gotten better, mostly better now, but it was a really hard time in my life because I couldn't let my mom do anything because I would just have the heart attack, panic attack feeling.
Yeah.
You know?
And I'm so glad that you're sharing that because I don't think that you're alone. I feel like, in each unique way, people experience some level of that difficulty of reintegrating and feeling a closer attachment to our parental figures, or just people that we got used to being with them every day. Yeah, we care about them, right? We care about their safety. Our safety may feel connected to their safety, right? Totally normal. And I just want to highlight that it was really hard, and you did it. Because I met you last year in 7th grade, and I know it was difficult, but you absolutely did it.
And you saw me go through my really great mental states and my really bad mental states. But I'm here today, and that's the most important thing.
And I'm going to change that a little bit for you and say, let's not say good and bad, because what does that even mean?
True,
and let's say helpful mental states and unhelpful mental states. And there were definitely times where you were in a very helpful mental state, like you were doing the things that fed your soul, that kept you going. And then there were times where that felt more difficult for you. And maybe when you were in those places, it was harder to leave your mom or come to school or do your work, right? There were a lot of barriers, and a lot of them came from that anxiety that you were experiencing in those moments.
Yeah. I noticed that. Love what you said there. Helpful and unhelpful. I think that's a great way to put it. I think we also kind of look at ourselves and say, I'm doing good or I'm doing bad, but you're right. What does good and bad mean? It doesn't have a meaning, because, if you're saying you're in a bad mental state, you're giving in to, and you have to admit that you need help eventually. That's one of the hardest things, I think, for most people, is admitting that they need help. I've noticed that a lot of people, friends that I've talked to, some of the hardest things they were doing to improve themselves was getting help. like, that's the first step. And the second step is, trying to improve, but sometimes it's hard to improve. And, like, if it's hard to improve for you, that's completely normal. It was hard. It's hard for me to improve still.
Well, it's a process, right? It doesn't happen overnight. A lot of the times I ask people, how long have you been feeling this way? And a lot of the times that feeling has been there for a while. And so if you think about it, if it took this long to develop this feeling to this unhelpful level, it's going to take some time to undo it. It's not going to happen the next day. And so that is the challenge, because the first step is I would say the first step is recognizing that you need help.
Yeah.
And the second step is then asking for that help. And the third step is doing something to create that change. And I would say that people dance in those steps multiple times. Like, it's not just linear. Sometimes then you go back and you're not ready to make that change, but you're still ready to ask for help, but you're not ready to make the change because it's so hard. And that's so normal and very typical of the experience of creating change for ourselves. It's just, we're programmed a certain way, and we're retraining our brain to think differently so that we can see the change that we want.
And I feel that especially when you're in, say, a state of depression or something, or a state where you feel like there's no purpose for you. That's one, completely normal. I've been there, and I think a lot of people have. But it's hard to, a lot of times in a state of depression, you feel very unmotivated. Mm-hmm. And you feel like, well, I just can't bring myself to try to make a change, which I think starting the change is actually probably the hardest part. Starting to, help yourself, that's something I struggle with. I have a hard time trying to help myself get better, because, like, it feels impossible when you're in that bad of a mental state. It feels impossible.
Yeah. And I would say that you can have the same conversation about almost any feeling that you want to change. Yeah. So when you're talking about the challenge of asking for help and creating change with depression, it's that lack of motivation, right? That doesn't, you're like, or that hopelessness, that sense of hopelessness that feels like, what's the point even? And there is a point. It's just that when you're in that darkness, it's hard to see it. Mm-hmm. With anxiety, a lot of the times you're avoiding, right? People may even be avoiding human interaction. So social anxiety. And so how easy is it to reach out to someone and say, can we talk? I need help, right? Because I'm avoiding people perhaps. And I know that asking for help means that I have to say the thing that makes me anxious. And that's just going to make me more anxious. And so I may even be avoiding wanting to talk about that. So there's a lot of challenges, and it's very normal to experience those challenges of reaching out and asking for help. And so I would say that asking for help is not the only thing you can do. There are many things you can do. And one of the beautiful things about having the internet is that there are resources online that you can access where maybe you're not ready to ask a person in person for help, but you can look online and start to learn more about your anxiety. You can find calming apps. You can even do some chats in places like, for example, one of my favorites is the Trevor Project, which is for LGBTQ plus people, youth especially. And you can chat with someone there about how you're doing and, and get help, and kind of anonymously, which is kind of nice. And there are lots of resources like that online that can be helpful. It's just making sure that you know your source, making sure that it's a reputable organization. Yeah. Sometimes you don't know who's on the other end if it's not a formal organization like the Trevor Project, for example.
I love that you brought up chats and online communication, because another thing I love about, there's so many ups and downs with the online world, but one thing that I think one thing that I love is that you can find communities of people just like you. Mm-hmm. Like, that's why, there's like, on Discord, you always got to be careful with messaging people.
Yeah.
But, like, don't share personal information. But like on Discord, you see like communities of like servers for only trans people where they can talk about what they're feeling, their problems with transitioning, or like a group of people, say with DID or something, and they feel very safe there because there's people just like them, and that also gives you a sense of you're not alone and there's so many people like me that I always have someone to talk to and communicate with.
Yeah, and I love that. I absolutely agree with you. And I think if you can start to build that knowledge for yourself that I'm not alone and I'm not the only one that experiences this, then it may translate to in-person help at some point, or confiding in a trusted person, like a friend or a parent, or someone at school like myself or a teacher. So I do feel like there's an important place for that online support in dealing with mental health. It's a slippery slope because you can find a lot of things out there. So you have to be really judicious about where you're going to put your energy into online.
Don't use Twitter. Just don't use Twitter. Everyone will like flame you there for breathing. Don't use Twitter.
Well, I think that's a good point, right? I'm assuming you're talking from experience, and so you do have to be very careful about protecting yourself online because, and I don't just mean private information, I mean emotionally, because you can have an emotional experience with an online experience, even if you don't really know the person on the other end. So being very careful about the energy that you're letting into your life, whether it's in person or online.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I've had some very intense experiences online that have really affected my mental state. Like really things, you're right, it's such a slippery slope and you got to be so careful because you can I found someone online and they've been my best friend for 2 years. They are like one of the sweetest people I've ever met. They're amazing. And that's the great side about meeting people online. But I've also met so many people online that have just ruined me almost. Not ruined me, but have just like, taken over me, manipulation, because you never know who's on the other side.
You really don't.
And you have to be really careful. I've said that a million times now, but it's true. And it's important to find the good, hiccups. Find the good people and not be afraid to walk away. And the great thing about online is if someone is treating you wrong, you just met them, and they're like, I don't want this person in my life, just block him and move on. Because you can just block them, and you don't got to communicate with them anymore. Yeah. And you can, talk about something like that with someone that you trust. Yeah. And you can, again, you got to be safe, but
it's a resource.
It's a resource, definitely. You just got to find the right people.
Yeah, and bringing it back to like what can we do to manage our anxiety, I would say, recognizing that you need some support and asking for that support may come first through online support and being careful about that. Certainly trying to, what I call build your tribe. Who are the people you can count on? And maybe some of those people are online. Maybe they're in real life. Maybe you're still looking for them. Yeah. That's possible, we don't find everybody who's important in our life all at once. They come at different times in our life. So you may still be looking for them. In the meantime, there's also, I know there's a lot, self-care is a big buzzword, and, what does that even mean? But I think loving yourself, finding ways, just as you invest in other people, because we put so much energy in creating connections with other people, putting that energy into yourself and what makes you happy or what makes you feel calm or what makes you feel proud. So that shifts you away from some of that anxiety, because when we're in that space of anxiety, we can go down that rabbit hole where our thoughts are unrealistic, unhelpful, future focused, not even grounded in the present reality. And so engaging in some activities that ground you in the present moment, like, hey, I'm going to make dinner for my family, and that's going to make me feel good because I just did this out of love, and I fed my family, and they're praising hopefully they're praising my cooking. If you didn't burn it, you know. But anyways, praising your efforts, right? For wanting to do something for someone else. Maybe it's walking your dog, or hanging out with any pet that you have, reading a book, listening to music. I know music is important to you.
Oh yeah, music gets me through a lot.
Absolutely.
Music gets me through those nights, and music is a healthy coping mechanism.
Yeah.
It's not hurting you. And you know what? I'm glad you brought up thoughts in, like unrealistic thoughts and that. I like to call them intrusive thoughts because they can be very intrusive on you. I think people get this mixed up a lot. There's a difference between intrusive and impulsive thoughts. Mm-hmm. Intrusive is unrealistic. Impulsive is also unrealistic, but impulsive is like an impulse that you're doing something that...
Well, you can have impulsive thoughts, but yes, a lot of the times when we're talking about impulse, we're talking about reacting very quickly without thinking sometimes, right? That's kind of the thought. But yeah, and intrusive is more of like, even if you don't want that thought, it feels like it keeps coming in, even though you don't want to think it. It's just like constantly popping up for you, and it's very intense to feel like you can't control those thoughts because they're so intrusive.
I have a mental disorder called OCD. It stands for obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's basically full of intrusive thoughts for most people. It's like, oh, for me, this is how mine works. If I don't turn that doorknob 12 times, someone in my family will die or something. And I've been dealing with these intrusive thoughts for 2 years straight now. It gets really tiring, but you can't control them. They just are always there, and your brain's always saying, hey, you gotta do this thing that interferes with your life and interferes with your relaxation, or just interferes with your friendships, because I'm telling you to, and something bad's gonna happen. And I notice that my intrusive thoughts come about people I care about. My intrusive thoughts will say something like, if you don't open and close this door 4 or 5 times, 4, 5, 6, I mean, right there, I had to say 6 instead of 4 or 5, 6.
Yeah.
And, like, one of your friends is gonna leave you, and that's also OCD and anxiety clash.
They're in the same family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They clash, and because intrusive thoughts are anxiety-provoking, because you're like, and acting on them with OCD or whatever, is like you giving in to the anxiety, but you can't control it.
Yeah, you can't. And, you know, people may have some moments like that, and that doesn't mean they have OCD, but when you deal with it persistently like you have, and, you know, you have a formal diagnosis of OCD, that's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to deal with.
It's really...
It's really
tiring. I'm not saying like, oh my God, I'm a victim. Come praise me.
No, it's just your reality. You're sharing your reality.
Yeah, I'm sharing like something that affects me.
And it's important to say, anxiety is a huge spectrum, and OCD is in that family because it produces anxiety for that person. These obsessive compulsive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, but just because you have anxiety does not mean you have OCD.
Yeah.
And just because you have anxiety doesn't mean that you have a diagnosable condition, right? Because the word anxiety is just a word. It's actually not a diagnosis. There are more specific diagnoses where you have to meet certain criteria for that. So just because you experience stress and anxiety does not mean that you meet the clinical criteria for a mental health disorder, right? Mm-hmm. It's important because we all experience it on some level. It's important to
like
acknowledge
if you're going down sorry for interrupting you.
No, yeah, go ahead.
If you're going down like a fast roller coaster, you're gonna be kind of scared. Like you're going down a fast roller coaster and it's meant to scare you. If you're in a haunted house, it's meant to scare you.
If you're presenting in front of your class, that might scare you. I mean, I don't think it's not meant to scare you, but it's very common to experience stress and anxiety for having to present in front of your classmates. Like that's a lot,
It's stressful.
Going to a dance may bring up stressful and anxious feelings for someone, right? So I love that you pointed it out, because there are situations in which that is a very typical response. And if you get through it, which hopefully you get through it, or you find the support to get through those moments, you'll come out the other side and realize, okay, I'm okay. I was able to present in front of my class, or I went to that dance, or whatever it is, and I'm okay. I can do it. And each time you have what's called a corrective experience, ideally the next time the anxiety is a little lower.
Yeah. I agree. It's sorry. I get out of breath very quick. It's a huge spectrum. There's so many. There's probably there's anxiety, which is such an umbrella term that there's probably 100 things under it, and maybe more. There's anxiety again. Yeah, it's just a feeling. It's not a diagnosis. Some people say it as a diagnosis, which is oh yeah, I have diagnosed anxiety.
Which would be more specific, like generalized anxiety, separation anxiety, phobia. I mean, there's specific ones. So yeah, no, it's possible that somebody, I don't want to dismiss anyone by saying just because you feel anxious doesn't mean you have a diagnosis.
You're not valid.
No, because some people validly, have gone to a mental health professional and have been clinically diagnosed. So there are, and you share your story that you have a specific diagnosis. You've been clinically diagnosed with it. So it's not to say that that doesn't happen. That, of course, there are people whose anxiety is so strong and so persistent and chronic, and they meet the criteria for a diagnosis. And ideally, if that is someone's situation, they're getting support.
Hopefully.
Yeah, like mental health support, or even in some cases, people receive medication support. But I also want to just be clear that there is a full range, and some people do not meet criteria and are experiencing human interactions, but they're just as stressful to experience those moments. And hopefully, what Nolan and I would like you to get out of this podcast is that you feel seen and you feel heard wherever, and not alone, wherever you fall in that spectrum of feeling anxious, right? Whether you have a diagnosis or not, whether it's a situational moment or a chronic situation, we see you, we want you to know that you're not alone, and that, hopefully this podcast helps you feel that, and that that Train Your Brain is available on campus if you ever feel like talking to a trusted adult like myself or someone that works on my team. We're here to help in that way as well. Yeah,
it's always the thing that we want you to get out of this podcast is that you're not alone. I always want people to know that I'm here for them. And you're here for them. And your friends are here for you. And there's always someone there for you. Maybe you haven't found them yet, but there's always someone there for you. There's always someone like you. And there's always someone who will be your friend, and who will support you. And yeah, I think that was really my final thought.
Yeah, well, we could talk forever because we usually do.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe we'll wrap it up. And
we'll do a part 2 in the future.
Oh, yeah, or, if anyone has future topics they want to hear us talk about, they can always reach out to me on my email, nstebbins@spusd.net.
If you need professional help, go to that email. If you would like to submit ideas, you can go to that email, or you can email me at nolanross13@spusd.net. That's NOLANROSS 13@stu.spusd.net. All right. Thank you for listening. We'll see you. We don't have a schedule yet, but we'll see you next week or the week after. We'll see you when we see you. I like that. All right. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Or listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.